Welcome to Ancient Mysteries. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode we journey deep into the arid desert of Nevada to a cave whose walls have whispered secrets for over 1,000 years. Lovelock Cave is more than a hollow in the rock. It is a place where legend, archaeology, and forbidden history converge. Within its dark interior, stories speak of towering red-haired giants, strange artifacts, and layers of ash and bone that challenge everything we think we know about the first peoples of North America. The region surrounding Lovelock Cave has been home to indigenous cultures for thousands of years. Before it became the center of a cryptic legend, it was known to the northern Paiute people as a sacred place tied to their oral histories. Situated near the Humboldt Sink in western Nevada, the cave was formed by the ancient Lahontan Lake system, which once spanned much of the Great Basin during the last ice age. As the waters receded over millennia, they left behind isolated bodies of water and, eventually, arid basins. Lovelock Cave rests in one such basin, carved into a limestone outcropping, its entrance now surrounded by dry, cracked desert floor. The northern Paiute, who lived in the area for countless generations, passed down stories of a time before their ancestors fully inhabited the region. One such story tells of a race of giants known as the Saite-Ka, described as red-haired, aggressive, and cannibalistic beings who once waged war against the Paiute. According to tribal tradition, these beings were eventually driven into a cave, where the entrance was set ablaze, trapping them inside forever. To the modern listener, it may sound mythic, a tale of good triumphing over evil, but for the Paiute, this was never treated as metaphor. Lovelock Cave, as we know it today, was rediscovered by white settlers in the late 1800s. Guano miners began excavating the site for bat droppings, a valuable fertilizer at the time. In the process, they disrupted a rich archaeological layer beneath the surface, unknowingly removing priceless materials and disturbing one of the most significant pre-Columbian sites in North America. Among the guano and dust were hundreds of artifacts, stone tools, duck decoys, woven baskets, and human remains. Some items were preserved in astonishing condition due to the cave's dry microclimate. But what set Lovelock apart was not just the quantity or age of the artifacts, but the whispers of a truth buried in legend, bones of individuals far taller than the average indigenous person, with what some described as red or auburn hair. The academic world initially approached the finds with caution, focusing on the preservation of indigenous artifacts and mummies that dated back several thousand years. But outside of scholarly journals, the older oral traditions were being linked to the physical discoveries. Locals and early researchers began to speculate. Could the Paiute legends of red-haired giants actually be grounded in reality? Could this cave, nestled in the Nevada wilderness, be the final resting place of a forgotten people lost to both time and fire? As we explore the mystery deeper, we begin to see Lovelock not just as a site of ancient habitation, but as a convergence point where myth and material history collide. The story of the cave's past is told not only through legends, but through ash, artifacts, and the uneasy silence that has followed the more controversial discoveries buried beneath its floor. The heart of the mystery lies in what was reportedly uncovered during the early excavations of Lovelock Cave. Beginning in the year 1912, archaeologists from the University of California were called in to conduct a more formal investigation after miners had already removed tons of guano and exposed layers of archaeological material. What they found was both fascinating and perplexing. Over 10,000 artifacts in total, including tools, jewelry, fishing equipment, and some of the oldest duck decoys ever discovered, dating back over 2,000 years. Among these finds were human remains. In particular, 2 mummified bodies sparked immediate interest and controversy. One was said to be a male measuring approximately 8 feet tall, the other a female just under 7 feet. Both were described by early witnesses as having distinctly red or auburn hair, a trait unusual for the native populations historically associated with the region. The bodies were remarkably well preserved, likely due to the dry cave conditions, but the physical dimensions and pigmentation raised questions that conventional archaeology was slow to answer. Further complicating matters were the numerous bones, often fragmented or incomplete, found throughout the cave. Some suggested signs of violence, including trauma or burn marks, and others appeared to have been broken and discarded. Charred remains were found in fire pits alongside tools and refuse, suggesting extended habitation, but the nature of the habitation was debated. Was this merely a dwelling site for ancient humans, or had it once been used for something more sinister? The oral history of the Paiute people became increasingly relevant to the investigation. Their legend told of the Sitaka, a race of red-haired cannibals who arrived by water and clashed violently with the early Paiute ancestors. The story ends with the Sitaka retreating into a cave, almost universally believed to be Lovelock, where they were exterminated by fire and sealed inside. The consistency of this legend across generations, paired with physical discoveries of oversized bones and burn layers, fueled speculation that the legend was not merely symbolic, but a record of real events. In later years, some of the remains were reportedly sent to museums and private collections, while others were lost or went undocumented. This created a climate of uncertainty. What exactly was discovered, and why did certain pieces vanish from the record? Critics argued that exaggeration and misidentification played a role in the accounts of giant skeletons. Yet the original reports, eyewitness testimonies, and ongoing absence of key artifacts only deepened public curiosity. The unearthed relics posed deeper questions. Who were these people? Why did they disappear? And why do mainstream historians avoid addressing the possibility that the Paiute may have preserved in story the memory of a now extinct branch of humanity? At the core of the Lovelock mystery lies this tension between physical evidence, cultural memory, and the question of who gets to write history. The physical evidence recovered from Lovelock Cave spans a wide spectrum, from mundane utilitarian tools to remarkable and confounding artifacts that continue to defy easy categorization. Among the most celebrated discoveries were the world's oldest known duck decoys, crafted with meticulous care from tule reeds and decorated with feathers. These decoys were not symbolic ornaments, but functional tools used for hunting waterfowl in the once lush wetlands that surrounded the cave. Their preservation, due to the arid conditions, offers a rare window into prehistoric lifeways in the Great Basin region. Beyond tools and hunting gear, archaeologists uncovered sandals woven from sagebrush bark, a variety of grinding stones, and intricately constructed baskets. These artifacts are consistent with a culture that had adapted well to the local environment and possessed a deep understanding of natural materials. However, these same excavations revealed anomalies that refused to align with established narratives. Notably, the burned layers of ash and charred bone fragments hinted at a violent chapter in the cave's use, possibly ritualistic, defensive, or even, as some believe, genocidal. In these same layers, human remains were discovered, many disarticulated and scattered. Some of the femurs and skull fragments appeared disproportionately large. While few complete skeletons were recovered in situ, several early researchers and guano miners reported finding bones far larger than would be expected for indigenous populations in the area. Although most of these remains were never officially catalogued, and some vanished after private acquisition, the descriptions persist in early field notes and local newspaper archives from the early 20th century. One particularly strange report involves a large, almost club-like stone weapon, far too heavy for the average human to wield effectively. Another was a mortar and pestle set so large that it would have been impractical for use by individuals of average stature. These findings, while not definitive proof of giants, suggest the possibility of a physically larger group, or at least one with unusual ceremonial or symbolic practices. Fragments of red hair were also noted in multiple mummy descriptions. While hair can change colour post-mortem due to environmental exposure and chemical breakdown, the consistency of red or auburn coloration in these accounts remains curious. The oral traditions of the Paiute, combined with these observations, form a compelling pattern, one that hints at a people not only physically distinct, but culturally separate from those who followed. Of equal intrigue are the burn marks inside the cave's ceiling and walls, supporting the oral tradition that a great fire was set to purge its former inhabitants. Charcoal deposits, fire-cracked stones, and a layer of soot bear silent witness to a deliberate inferno. These are not the remnants of cooking fires or casual habitation. They suggest a fire of exceptional intensity and purpose, one consistent with the tale of entrapment and extermination. The archaeological findings at Lovelock Cave raise fundamental questions. While much of the material points to a thriving and complex indigenous culture, the unexplained anomalies hint at another presence, one still shrouded in ash, silence, and secrecy. Mainstream academic interpretations of Lovelock Cave have generally remained cautious, focusing on what can be directly measured, dated, and classified. The prevailing scholarly view holds that the site was used by ancestors of the northern Paiute and related Great Basin tribes for thousands of years. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found in the cave suggests continuous or intermittent human activity as early as 2000 BCE, with the bulk of habitation occurring between 500 BCE and 1300 CE. Researchers categorize the finds as part of the Lovelock culture, a recognized prehistoric group known for its unique basketry, fishing tools, and survival strategies adapted to the harsh, shifting climate of inland Nevada. From this perspective, the cave's extensive artifact collection reflects the ingenuity of an indigenous people living in isolation. The duck decoys, woven sandals, and tule mats are seen as evidence of sophisticated adaptation to a lacustrine ecosystem. The burned layers, in this interpretation, are attributed to natural causes or to phases of human use involving cooking, tool-making, or even accidental fires. The disarticulated human remains are described as the result of secondary burial practices or natural post-mortem displacement within the sediment. Skeptics of the giant narrative argue that the accounts of oversized bones and red hair have been exaggerated or misreported over time. Hair exposed to environmental factors, especially in arid conditions rich in saltpeter and guano, can lighten in color and take on a reddish hue. As for the claims of giant skeletons, critics suggest that incomplete or distorted remains may have been misinterpreted, or in some cases, deliberately sensationalized by early miners or opportunistic writers seeking notoriety. Furthermore, many of the more extraordinary claims, including reports of mummified remains measuring over 7 feet, lack peer-reviewed documentation. Several original artifacts, including the alleged oversized bones, were never formally studied or were lost after being removed from the site by private collectors. Without chain of custody or photographic evidence, modern researchers remain skeptical. Museums such as the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca and the Nevada State Museum have acknowledged the existence of large human remains in their records, but few are on public display, and many have ambiguous provenance. Academic institutions emphasize caution when interpreting folklore. They view the Paiute legend of the Seed Ka as a symbolic tale, one that may reflect real historical tensions between tribes, embellished over generations. In this view, the legend serves as a cultural memory of conflict, perhaps with another band of early people who were different in language, appearance, or behavior, but not necessarily giants in the literal sense. Still, for all the effort to ground the cave's story in conventional anthropology, certain elements remain difficult to dismiss. The presence of burned human remains, the pattern of ash deposits, and the widespread reports of anomalously large artifacts persist. While academia continues to interpret Lovelock Cave within the boundaries of accepted prehistoric timelines and ethnographic patterns, the shadow of the unexplained stretches just beyond the firelight of certainty. Outside the careful walls of academia, Lovelock Cave has become a magnet for debate, doubt, and alternative investigation. While scholars caution against sensationalism, a growing number of researchers, independent historians, and enthusiasts argue that the official narrative overlooks too much and explains too little. These conflicting viewpoints often hinge on what was never fully recorded, what quietly vanished from museum inventories, and what local witnesses claimed, but institutions refused to acknowledge. One of the earliest and most persistent anomalies is the disappearance of the oversized remains. Multiple first-hand accounts from the early 20th century, including reports by miners and early archaeologists, described skeletons or bones of unusual size. While no complete skeleton measuring 8 feet is publicly available for verification today, early writings describe femurs, jawbones, and skulls too large to match average human proportions. Some of these were said to be shipped to the Smithsonian Institution, but no official documentation confirms their arrival or analysis. This absence has fueled allegations of institutional suppression. Photographs of large skulls, once reportedly displayed at the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca, have circulated among researchers. Some show jawbones so large they appear capable of fitting over a modern human's face. Yet these skulls are no longer on exhibit, and museum staff have offered limited comment regarding their whereabouts. Whether removed for conservation, reclassified, or quietly withdrawn, their disappearance adds weight to those who believe that something is being hidden. Even the ancient Paiute accounts offer no easy resolution. When early ethnographers and explorers recorded the oral traditions, they were often met with consistent versions of the tale. The red-haired Sitakar were real, they were feared, and their extermination was a defining event in the tribe's history. The story was not framed as myth, metaphor, or parable. It was history. Passed down through memory rather than manuscript, the legend endured not for entertainment, but as cultural record. Yet this clash between oral tradition and written history remains unresolved. The academic emphasis on peer-reviewed evidence struggles to integrate Indigenous testimony without material proof, while Indigenous memory systems never relied on written documentation in the first place. The result is a cultural standoff, one side valuing bones and measurements, the other preserving meaning and story. Adding to the confusion are archaeological records that are themselves incomplete. Many of the initial digs were hurried or conducted with limited scientific oversight. Guano miners removed layers of sediment before archaeologists arrived, likely destroying crucial context. Later excavations focused primarily on tools and baskets, while human remains were inconsistently documented and sometimes dismissed as unremarkable. It is impossible to reconstruct with certainty what was destroyed, misfiled, or quietly buried again. This ambiguity has allowed multiple truths to coexist. For conventional scholars, Lovelock Cave is a window into prehistoric subsistence and ingenuity. For others, it is a sealed tomb hiding the remnants of a forgotten race. The lack of consensus is not just academic, it is existential. It raises the possibility that the human story, as it is currently taught, may be missing entire chapters. The mystery of Lovelock Cave has also become a fertile ground for fringe theories and speculative ideas. For those who reject the limits of conventional archaeology, the site represents more than just an archaeological puzzle. It is a breach in the official timeline, a crack in the historical bedrock through which forbidden knowledge leaks. These theories range from the plausible to the extraordinary, but all share a common theme, that Lovelock was once inhabited by beings who were not like us, or at least not like the humans history has recorded. One of the most persistent fringe ideas suggests that the red-haired giants were not simply tall humans, but the remnants of an ancient pre-cataclysmic race. Some researchers have linked them to global myths of the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in ancient Hebrew texts, or to other postulated ancient hybrids born of gods and mortals. In this context, the Sitakar are viewed not as a local legend, but as a cultural echo of a broader global memory of giants who once walked the earth. From the Book of Enoch to early Norse sagas, and from South American oral histories to Polynesian chants, stories of abnormally large, often red-haired humanoid beings appear with uncanny similarity. Others point to the advanced nature of some of the cave artifacts. Oversized tools, mortars, and pestles, which would be unwieldy for average-sized humans, are sometimes interpreted as designed for larger hands and greater strength. In this view, these objects are not ceremonial or symbolic, but functional items used by people whose proportions matched the legends. A more radical perspective suggests the possibility of ancient extraterrestrial influence. If such beings once interacted with early human cultures, as proponents of ancient astronaut theory claim, then perhaps Lovelock Cave was a burial ground or outpost for those interactions. Some argue that the red hair, Unusual height and apparent conflict with local tribes mirror the descriptions of off-world visitors found in ancient texts and petroglyphs across different continents. This view posits that the Sita may not have been human in the conventional sense, but something else entirely, survivors of a forgotten hybrid lineage or travellers from a distant origin. Even the idea of cannibalism, central to the Paiute narrative, has been reinterpreted. In many global myths, cannibalistic behaviour is associated with degenerated or fallen beings, once powerful but corrupted by their isolation or exile. This mirrors stories from ancient Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica and beyond, in which gods or giants were cast out and in their decline turned against humanity. Skeptics will dismiss these theories as pseudoscience or fantasy. But their staying power lies in the gaps left behind by academia, the missing bones, the lost artifacts, and the cultural reluctance to explore indigenous oral histories as historical documents. In the absence of definitive answers, speculation thrives. Lovelock Cave sits uneasily between these worlds. It is a real place with real bones, real tools, and real legends, but it is also a mythic space, a place where the boundaries between history and memory, science and story, begin to blur. Beyond the artifacts, bones and legends, the deeper mystery of Lovelock Cave lies in its symbolic weight. It is more than a cave. It is a threshold between worlds, between timelines, between accepted history and the possibilities we refuse to consider. For the northern Paiute, the story of the Sita is not only a record of the past, but a lesson about survival, about danger, and about the power of collective memory. In many indigenous traditions, oral histories serve not just to inform, but to protect. The story of giants trapped and burned in a cave is a warning, a moral, and a spiritual boundary. In that sense, the cave itself becomes a symbol, darkness sealed by flame, a hidden truth covered in ash. Whether the Saikar were giants, invaders, or symbolic representations of fearsome outsiders, their story has endured far longer than the scientific attention paid to it. That endurance speaks to something deeper, the need to remember what threatens us, even if it no longer exists. There is also the question of what it means when cultures bury the past. Across the world, ancient sites are uncovered, studied and reburied, not just with dirt, but with silence. The story of Lovelock Cave challenges us to examine how history is curated, whose voices are elevated and whose are dismissed. In this case, the story of the red-haired giants is preserved not in textbooks, but in whispers, in tribal memory, and in the gaps of what was never officially recorded. Symbolically, the Sita represent the other, a people apart from the familiar. They are cast as violent, as monstrous, as something to be purged. But even that narrative raises questions. Were they truly cannibalistic giants? Or were they simply different? Were they invaders, or just another tribe whose customs and appearance caused fear and resistance? This ambiguity feeds into a broader pattern seen across ancient history. Those who do not fit the mold are often turned into monsters or gods or myths. Cultures that vanish without clear reason are mythologized. Their remnants become relics, and their stories become warnings. The cave, in this framework, becomes a tomb not just for bodies but for meaning itself. It is a chamber of erased memory, a sealed vault of prehistory waiting to be reinterpreted. There is also the resonance of the fire, the act of burning out the past. Fire is cleansing, but it is also destructive. If the legend is true, the fire at Lovelock was meant to end something, to seal it away forever. But fire also preserves. In the charred bones and carbon traces, in the soot-stained walls and layers of ash, the story still lingers. It was not destroyed, only transformed. The enduring fascination with Lovelock Cave is not simply about giants or missing skeletons. It is about the deeper mystery of how we remember, how we forget, and how we decide which truths are allowed to rise into daylight, and which are left buried in the dark. The most compelling aspects of the Lovelock Cave mystery do not come from a single artifact, a single legend, or even a single academic study. They come from the convergence of all these threads: oral tradition, material discovery, historical silence, and cultural memory, into a single unresolved story that refuses to fade. As we revisit the cave's most enduring elements, a pattern begins to emerge. The physical evidence, while fragmented and often poorly documented, includes oversized bones, large tools, and strange burn patterns. The stories told by miners and early researchers are remarkably consistent, even if modern science has chosen to marginalize them. The descriptions of red-haired remains, impossibly large weapons, and bones that simply do not fit the narrative echo across time, refusing to be fully dismissed or confirmed. The oral tradition of the northern Paiute stands unshaken. Passed down for generations, it details a war of survival against a violent red-haired people who were ultimately trapped and burned alive in a cave. The geographic, cultural and historical alignment between this legend and the actual site at Lovelock is too precise to ignore. It is not a vague similarity, it is a direct overlay of story and place. The missing pieces deepen the mystery. If reports of giant skeletons were fabricated, why do early records from multiple sources repeat the same details? Why are key bones and skulls no longer available for study? Why do museums acknowledge receiving remains of unusual size, yet no longer exhibit them? And why do institutions like the Smithsonian, repeatedly named in early accounts, have no public record of receiving such finds, despite their alleged involvement? Alternative theories fill these gaps with bold suggestions that the Site-Ka were part of a global race of giants, that they may have been hybrid beings, or that their destruction was part of a larger, deliberate erasure of an entire species or subspecies from history. While unproven, these theories persist precisely because official explanations remain incomplete or absent. The silence is deafening, and perhaps most revealing is what Lovelock Cave tells us about our collective discomfort with rewriting history. To accept the possibility of a lost race, or even a misunderstood tribal conflict with real physical consequences, would require a shift in how we understand early human societies in North America. It would mean opening doors to timelines we have long sealed shut. It would mean acknowledging that legend and archaeology may not be separate domains, but overlapping forms of truth. The cave, then, becomes a mirror. It reflects not only what we have uncovered, but what we are unwilling to face. It shows how easy it is to ignore voices that speak in unfamiliar ways, whether those voices come from tribal elders, forgotten miners, or the ancient dead buried in ash and stone. Lovelock Cave challenges us to consider whether history is written by discovery or by selective forgetting. What remains of Lovelock Cave is not just its shadowed interior or its scattered artifacts, but a profound and lingering question. What truths have we lost by deciding which stories deserve to be believed? The Site-Ka may never be verified by modern science. Their bones may never be laid out on a clean museum table, and their names may never appear in the sanctioned history books. But the imprint they left, on the cave, on the Paiute memory, and on the minds of those who dare to ask forbidden questions, has not faded. In many ways, the mystery is not about giants. It is about our relationship to the past. It is about how civilizations remember through story when the paper trail runs cold. It is about how indigenous knowledge systems have preserved records that our technologies have yet to fully understand. And it is about how much trust we place in institutions that, for all their resources and rigor, still sometimes choose silence over uncertainty. There is a quiet dignity to the landscape that surrounds Lovelock Cave. The dry wind that moves over the Humboldt Sink, the baked earth that once held a vast inland sea, the cliffs that cradle the cave like a scar in the stone. They bear no signs, no plaques, no warnings. But something happened there. Something that defies simple classification. The cave holds no more bones, no more giants, no more red hair, only questions and perhaps echoes. And that is where the power of Lovelock Cave truly lies. Not in whether the giants were real, not in whether the Smithsonian hid the bones, but in the fact that the mystery endures generation after generation, unkillable by time or fire. Each person who enters the cave, physically or through story, must wrestle with their own beliefs about truth, history, and what it means to trust the voices that whisper from the dust. The cave is silent now, but in that silence is an invitation. To look again, to listen deeper, and to ask what else might be buried in the places we think we already know. Thanks for listening. This has been Ancient Mysteries. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, gain access to bonus content, and unlock our entire library of video podcasts, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.